Hey guys, it's Cassidy again, and today, you know the drill, we're going to be reading more of Not a Drop to Drink. I think we're on chapter 15. Yeah, here we go. Alright, so, chapter 15. Winter came viciously. The snow fell in slanted sheets, sticking to the trees and rocks. Lynn would run outside to deliver more wood through the basement window into Lucy's expectant hands and come back inside with a coating of ice on her hair. Weeks passed where they saw no one else, and Lynn would anxiously peer toward the stream to be reassured by the puffs of smoke that rose over the trees. Stebbs could see her through her binoculars when the cold was bearable enough for her to look. Oh, Stebbs she could see. Lynn taught Lucy to play simple card games, and they spent many hours making up their own. Lucy demanded a bath, and so Lynn brought in buckets of snow from outside to warm on the stove so that the girl could have a sponge bath at least. She caved into the temptation herself and even washed her hair, something that Mother had always warned her against doing in the winter, fearing that Lynn would catch a cold. But they kept the fire burning brightly, and Lucy would hum quietly while putting tiny braids in Lynn's hair and fixing them up with little bows that she'd found among some dolls in the attic. The little fingers eased through Lynn's hair, coaxing her into a doze that she fought against. Even with the chance of attack at a minimum, she kept her handgun within reach at all times. Lucy hummed a little song while she played with Lynn's long hair. Have you ever cut it? Every now and then Mother would, usually just to sprinkle the yard to scare off the coyotes. Not often. I like it long. Me too. Their conversation dwindled off, and each fell into their own thoughts as the short daylight hours drifted past outside. Lynn watched Lucy making shadow puppets in the firelight and wondered how Neva was holding up. If not for the little girl, it would have been Lynn's first winter alone, and she wasn't sure how she could have handled it. The long hours of the night could not all be filled by sleep, and the companionship of another was the only thing to alleviate boredom. But Neva had Eli, and Lynn quickly chased the question away of how they might be filling their hours together. Her heart rejected her mind's attempts to control her emotions, and she tossed without sleep for a long time in the dark. Lucy's rhythmic breathing rose and fell, but the little girl's peace didn't extend across the room. Lynn tossed a few times before slipping her coat on and heading up the steps. At least on the roof, she would be forced to be alert, and her mind couldn't wander places she didn't want it going. The next day dawned cold but clear. For the first time in a while, there was a cloudless sky, and the sun warmed the air enough for it to be bearable. Would you like to go outside? Lynn asked Lucy. Lucy bounced off her cot and dressed in layers in a second, eager to be out of the basement. Her thoughts were contagious. They had not been outside long when Lucy shouted up to the roof for Lynn, and she saw Eli making his way through the snowdrifts toward them. The snow was sticking, bunching to his clothes in every place that came in contact, but he kept coming. Lynn climbed down from the roof and walked with Lucy to greet their visitor. Hey, little lady, Eli cried out when Lucy jumped into his arms. You've gotten big. Lynn says I'm growing, Lucy said proudly. She's been checking my height on the wall, and I've grown an inch and a half. Do you know what an inch is? I do, Eli said seriously. That's good work. Hey, I want to show you something. Come on. Lucy bounded away from them over the drifts toward the corner of the house where she'd begun a collection of bird nests that had been blown from their trees. Lynn and Eli followed slowly, pushing their way through the heavy snow that went past their knees at times. How are you? Eli asked. We're okay. We've got plenty of wood and food stored up. Water, too. I meant like, how are you? How's your day? Lynn's brow furrowed. Well enough, I guess. I'm happy that we got food to eat and wood to burn. Eli shook his head and smothered a smile. It's okay that I came, right? Of course it is. You haven't seen Lucy since you handed her off to me, and she's family. I came to see you too, you know. Well, I'm here, Lynn said, not able to find any other words. Eli sighed and stopped walking, but Lynn kept struggling through the snow. Hey, he called after her. What? Lynn turned and was hit directly in the face by a snowball. That's what. Lynn sputtered as the snow on her face melted and it ran in icy rivulets down her neck, finding no words for her surprise. Snowball fight. Awesome. Lucy came flying at Lynn and knocked her flat on her face in a drift, shaking what was left of her composure completely. She grabbed the girl by the ankles and pulled her up into the air, tossing her headlong into a drift. Lucy emerged, soaked and laughing, with a freshly rolled snowball in each hand and revenge on her mind. Lynn ducked the first one, but the second one hit her square in the chest. She ignored it and began rolling her own arsenal until Eli knocked her on her side and hijacked her stash, pelting her with her own weapons at close range. She yelped and took out his ankles. Lucy landed on both of them with enough force to knock the breath out of all of them. They laid in a breathless heap for a solid minute, soaked and laughing. "Never thought I'd see one of them in your yard," Stebbs said when he arrived later, motioning toward the snowman standing guard by the wood cord. Lynn pushed her hair out of her face and shrugged. "Lucy wanted to, and I thought maybe if I put a coat on it, somebody looking might think there was a person standing out there, keeping watch. I suppose the carrot sticking out of his face was a tactical decision, too. I got a well-stocked root cellar, and that one was not looking great, so don't start thinking I'm as sentimental as you." Lynn delivered a punch to his arm hard enough to penetrate the layers and make Stebbs wince. "Easy, Tiger, don't go beating on the old man. The old man needs to hold his tongue. He's been without anybody to talk to for a long while. I see your pond's found a new use." Stebbs glanced toward the pond where Eli was gliding across the ice on his boots, Lucy perched on his shoulders, hooting like a loon. "Mother would roll in her grave if I'd been able to dig her one," Lynn said, but there was a smile on her face. "Nice braids," Stebbs said. Shut up. Sorry. Their visitor stayed through the evening, and Lynn brought some of the larger wood chunks inside to use as chairs. The four sat in a comfortable circle near the stove while they ate their supper, topped off with some peaches that Stebbs had brought along mixed with snow. "It's kinda like ice cream," Lucy said, juice dripping down her chin. "Kinda," Stebbs answered. "What's ice cream?" Lynn asked. "You poor deprived child." Eli shook his head in mock despair, earning a whack on the back of the head from Lynn. She had found herself making excuses to touch him all day. Lucy had coaxed her out on the ice, and even though her balance was good, she'd slipped more than once when Eli was nearby. He always caught her neatly and propped her back on her feet, much to Stebbs' amusement. "I wish you had your guitar, Uncle Eli," Lucy said, once they finished their peaches. "I'd like to hear a song." "You know, it's funny, I forgot to grab it when the police kicked down my door and arrested me." Lucy crawled onto Stebbs' lap. "Do you have a guitar in your secret basement?" "No, little one, sorry," he answered, soothing her hair. "Wish I did." "I think there's one in the attic," Lynn piped up, to everyone's surprise. "Seems like I've seen one up there." Lucy bounced up and down on Stebbs' lap. Go check. "I'll come with you." Eli stood with Lynn and followed her up the stairs after grabbing a flashlight. Lynn opened the door to the kitchen. "Haven't been inside a real house in a while," Eli said, flashing the light off the walls. "Almost feels funny." "It's weird. Sometimes when I think about it," Lynn said. "This is my own house, and I never use it. Mother grew up here. Her dad was raised here too, but all I ever see is the basement." She didn't add that having Eli beside her in the upstairs should feel weird too, but it didn't. "You never come upstairs?" "Rarely. The bathroom here on the first floor is set up so that we can use it, and Mother stored a lot of stuff in the attic. But mostly we stayed in the basement." "Why's that?" "Easier to heat in the winter and stays cool in the summer. Only one access door, and the windows are too low to the ground to pose much of a threat. Anyone who tries to come in those, we've got an advantage on them. The windows here on the first floor are a good 8 feet long, at least 4 to a room. Impossible to defend." They walked through the dining room and into the living room, where Eli looked at the windows in question. "It's such a waste," he said. "I know it's a smart decision, staying downstairs. But this is a beautiful house. You've got all the space and these high ceilings. In the city, even in the nicer part where we lived, there'd be 10 people living in a space this large." Lynn shuddered at the thought and led him up the curved staircase. "I have a bedroom upstairs. I remember kinda what that was like. Attic's here, watch your step." The door opened onto a narrow staircase that led up to a gabled room. Eli followed Lynn up the stairs, flickering the light in front of her so she could see. Look at all this stuff. The walls were lined with furniture, old bulky antiques that had once filled the downstairs rooms. Steamer trunks were against one wall, tightly rolled area rugs leaned against the other. Mother moved most everything up here a long time ago, Lynn said. She figured anyone foraging for stuff would look in the downstairs window and think her house had already been emptied of anything useful. Who would steal a piano? Eli asked, striking one lonely key that rang out through the small attic. Nobody, probably, but Mother didn't want to take the chance. Everything up here meant something to her, and she didn't want to see it go up in smoke for someone's firewood or one of her great-grandma's rugs used for a blanket. Makes sense, I guess. I think maybe she was hoping that someday life would be normal again, her kind of normal, and that she'd put everything back in the way it was supposed to be. Like sometime in the future when we wouldn't have to worry about whether or not two people could defend the living room. That sounds nice, Eli said sadly, trailing the light over the furniture. What's in the trunks? Old clothes, mostly. Lynn kneeled down next to one of them. This is where I got Lucy's clothes and shoes from. It's my old stuff. Bring the light over here. Eli followed, and Lynn spotted... Eli followed, and Lynn spotted the guitar case, propped it behind one of the trunks in between a secretary desk and an old rocking horse. Knew I'd seen it recently, she said. They made their exit quietly, leaving the relics of a safe past behind them in the dusty darkness. They'd found the guitar, but the trip had been in vain. Eli strummed the chords, and Lucy made a nasty face. Ugh, what is wrong with it? It's out of tune, Eli said, running his hand along the strings. I can tune. That's a disappointment, and no mistake, Steb said as he rose to his feet. Can't tell you the last time I heard music. I'd best get going. I'm sure I've lost the fire, but I can probably stir up some coals yet if I get back home. Lucy bounced up when Stebbs did. Can I come with you? I want to play witch. It's all right with me if it's okay with Lynn. You got a gun on you? Lynn asked. Of course, Stebbs said. It's all right with me then, she said somewhat reluctantly. You listen to Stebbs crossing the field, Lucy, she warned as the girl zipped up her thick coat. The child nodded solemnly and took Stebbs' hand. You two have a good night. Stebbs tipped Eli a wink as he went up the staircase. Slick old guy, isn't he? Eli said to Lynn when she came back from locking the door behind them. What's that? Eli ran his fingers over the strings once more, letting their music fill the basement. I can tune this up in a few minutes, if I want. I'm guessing Stebbs knows that as well as I do, but he slid on out of here and took Lucy with him so we could be alone. Lynn blushed and blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which wasn't the best choice in the moment. How is Neva? She's all right, I guess, Eli said, avoiding Lynn's eyes. It's hard, being stuck in a small space together for a long time. That's part of the reason I came today. I think she needed some time alone. I wanted to see you too, though, he added quickly. I'm glad you came, Lynn admitted. Really? It's not easy to tell with you. I am glad. Good. Lucy seems happy, Eli said. She misses her mother. I know it didn't show today, but she was so excited to see you and thrilled to be outside. At night, though, she cries when she thinks I'm asleep. She didn't share with Eli how torn she felt, lying in her own bed and listening to the quiet morning. The basement gave them so little privacy, she wanted to allow Lucy the peace to cry alone. And some nights Lynn's cheeks were wet as well, her own mother near in her mind. Will Neva ever be ready to take her back? Do you want her to? Lynn leaned back against Lucy's cot and shut her eyes. No, but she's not mine to keep. I know Neva thinks she's not capable of caring for her. It was true at the time she said it, Eli answered. But she's doing better, physically anyway. All of the wildness of this place scares her, though. She only leaves the house to visit the baby's grave. Where'd it go? Oh, there we are. There's no shame in being scared, Lynn said. I imagine if I were plunked down in the middle of Antargo, I'd probably hide too. Our mom thought there was shame in it, Eli said. Even back in the city, Neva jumped at the smallest things. Mom wanted the best possible life for Bradley, said he was the kind of person who needed to keep the race going. A girl who cries when there's a mouse in the kitchen didn't exactly fit the ideal mom had in mind for him. What about you? Aren't you the type that's supposed to carry on the race? For the first time, Eli's smile wasn't a nice one. Oh, I'm not Bradley. That's something I've known since I could see. The population schedules are figured out according to the male. So a woman could have 2 kids, but each of them would have a different father, 1 child per male. My dad died before I was born, so I don't know what he was like, but he certainly didn't have the place in Mom's heart that Bradley's dad did. If I'd had a child when we were still in the city, it wouldn't have been half the event Bradley's was. Lynn nodded and looked at Eli in the firelight. She hadn't seen him without layers of clothing since their first meeting by the stream, and he had improved since then. Sinewy muscles lined his arms, the hollows in his cheeks were filled. He caught her looking, and she glanced away, clearing her throat. But you said your mom had a musician picked out for you. She said my best attribute was my voice, and she found me a nice little pianist. I'd say your bow shot is your best attribute, Lynn said. That would win me a lot of girls back in the city, Eli said. They all want a man who can nail a squirrel at 50 yards. They both laughed. Besides, he went on, Stubbs says I've got nothing on you. True enough, Lynn said, and they laughed again. I'm better with the rifle, though, she added. I spent so much time prone on the roof, peering through that scope, my neck's got a permanent crick in it. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Lynn cracked her neck to illustrate. You know, that pianist told me I give pretty good back rubs. Oh, did she now? Yep, Eli smiled at her. Of course, I imagine you've got more stress than a city musician. A bit. A fellow can try, though, right? Lynn eyed him gravely for a moment. You're not going to try to have sex with me, are you? For the briefest moment, Eli was speechless, and Lynn felt a flush running up her neck at the thought she'd said something stupid. The moment was broken when he threw both hands in the air in surrender. Wouldn't dream of it. Well, I might dream. Lynn tossed her boot at him, cutting him off mid-sentence. He swatted it out of the air with ease. Get over here. Lynn laughed and scooted over the floor to lean back against his legs. He touched her gently at first, only on the shoulders, and Lynn felt her entire body tense under the contact. He moved slowly but thoroughly, running his thumbs up and down through the strong cords of her neck and down the tops of her shoulder blades. Soon the newness of being touched by him was less alarming and more pleasant, and Lynn sagged against him, allowing all the tension in her life to seep out under his practiced hands. Yeah, you're okay at this, she said eventually, breaking the silence. Don't be so critical. You're slightly more tense than the pianist. Oh, am I? Lynn asked, but she noticed that Eli had yet to call his old girlfriend by her name. What was she like? Who? Your girlfriend. Oh, well. Eli's hand stopped moving for 1 second, but he picked the rhythm back up. She was a nice girl, and we got along fine, but the spark was missing, you know? I don't know. The only people I knew in my life before you guys were Mother and Stubbs. There's no real way to explain it, Eli said. Sometimes you meet a person, and even if you don't know them at all, you can't stop thinking about them. And every time you talk to them, you get nervous, and when you go home, you think about every word you said to each other, replaying it in your mind. Lynn rested her head against Eli's knee, relishing the feel of his hands against her neck. I guess I do know, she said. His hands came to rest on her shoulders. It wouldn't take all that much for me to tune the guitar, if you want. Really? Give me a few minutes, he said, propping her up gently and easing out from behind her shoulders. She watched his hands moving as expertly up and down the strings, as familiar with the instrument as she was with her gun. His head cocked to the side as each note, all new to her ear, was adjusted to his liking. When he was finished, he struck a simple chord, the sound echoing inside the stone walls. I feel bad that Stubbs is missing it, Eli said. I know he said it's been a while since he heard music. Not that I don't like having you to myself. I've never heard music either, Lynn said. Eli's hand stopped moving over the strings. Never? Not once? She shrugged. How would I? We had bigger worries. No pressure on me, then, Eli joked. It's only the deciding moment on whether or not you reject music for the rest of your life. I already like it. All you heard was the C chord. Then shut up and play something. Eli tossed a pillow at her, but she caught it deftly, the teasing smile on her face dissipating as he began his song, a slow, lilting melody that filled the dark corners of the basement. His voice joined the tune, very different from his speaking voice, lower and throbbing with the depths of emotion that existed under his jokes. She watched him as he played, studying the small muscles in his arms that jumped as he picked the strings, the slight squinting of his eyes as he concentrated. He came to a slow stop and smiled apologetically. That's as far as I got, back home in Antargo. You wrote that? Yep. It's not like holding a deer heart in your hand or anything, but it passes the time. The sound of spitting ice hitting the window brought them both out of their pleasant reverie. Shit, Eli stood and tapped at the window, but the freezing glaze on the other side didn't move. Do you think Stebbs and Lucy made it home in time? Lynn rose from the floor and stretched, still lost in the spell of the song. Definitely. It only takes a few minutes, and he's smart enough to have hurried her along. I imagine it'd be pretty unpleasant to be stuck outside. If you're looking for an invitation to stay, you don't have to fish for it. I won't send you out in this. Will Neva worry, though? Doubt it. She's probably already asleep. All right, then. Lynn closed the door to the stove, dropping the basement into blackness. Damn, Eli said. I can't see a thing. Is this your plan? For me to break a leg and be your prisoner? Lynn found his hand with hers. Follow me, she said, and led him to Lucy's cot by the fire. You can sleep here. Sorry, that's my bird. Wait, his hand squeezed hers. Who's that Wait, who said that's the end of the back rub? Lynn snorted in the dark. There's not enough room for both of us in there. We'll make it work. He tugged on her in the dark, and she hesitated. I don't want anything from you, but I'm not ready to let go yet. She wordlessly climbed in the cot. Eli slipped his shirt off and slid in beside her, snaking one arm around her rib cage. Lynn had expected to tense up again, with the feeling of his skin so close to hers, but instead she relaxed and leaned into him. You can think of it as heat conservation if it makes you feel better, Eli said in her ear, and she giggled. She laid against him for a while in silence, enjoying the thud of his heart against her eardrum, the companionable tangle of their legs. The small differences in their bodies were fascinating to her, the rasping of his stubble against her cheek, the bony outcrops of his knuckles, so much more prominent than her own. She ran her thumbs over them, surprised at how strong his hands had become in the short time since she'd met him. Her hands straight up, her fingers straight up his arms to the muscles that had developed there, tracing the lines of his veins. Long nights spent alone in her bed had not prepared her for the intimacy of lying with him, no matter how comfortable. His hands were doing their own exploring, and her breath caught in her throat. Eli broke the silence. So, I'm not used to asking for permission, but I don't want to get shot either. A permission for what? A kiss. Oh, sure, Lynn said offhand, surprised that such a small thing had made him uncomfortable. She leaned forward and gave him a quick peck on his cheek, Mother's ultimate show of affection that had followed her down into sleep on rare occasions. That's not quite what I meant, Eli said. What then? That's how Mother always kissed me. I'm not going to kiss you like your mother. Come here. His hand tightened in her hair, and Lynn was surprised when he brought his mouth to hers, then pleased. He moved against her, and she quickly understood that body heat could be made and not just conserved. He pulled away from her. Okay, that's enough, or I'm going to have to throw myself into a snowbank. Why's that? Eli tucked her head under his chin. I'll explain some other time. Fair enough. Lynn settled in against him. Eli stroked her hair for a few minutes before speaking. Earlier, when you asked about Neva, I meant to tell you she made something for me to bring Lucy as a present. Yeah? Lynn waited for him to continue, irritated that Neva had come up in conversation yet again. She tried to make some kind of doll out of dried grass and sticks, but when I picked it up, it fell apart. Neva went to bed and cried. She said she has nothing to offer her little girl. That's ridiculous. Maybe, but I kinda know how she feels. I almost didn't come today for the same reasons. I wasn't supposed to be the one in charge when we left the city, you know. Bradley was the strong one, the smart one, the one who knew what to do. Um, we got out here and I could barely keep them alive. I'm learning, but I still don't have much to offer, especially to you. Lynn nestled her head under his chin. You survived. You kept them both alive. You're doing something right. And I found you, he added. That's pretty right, I think. I think so too, she said quietly, the sound of his heartbeat loud in her ear. And they slept. Lynn woke to the sound of loading wood in the stove, the soft morning light rendering the basement the same gray as his eyes. I can do that, she said. I know you can, Eli answered, but kept loading anyway. She moved to the edge of the bed, where the pillows still smelled like him, and decided to lie there for a few more minutes. He'd already dressed in his heavier clothes and was rubbing his hands against the chill of the basement. She burrowed farther under the covers, indulging herself in an unaccustomed lack of responsibility. Gets cold down here quick once the fire goes out, Eli said. Yeah, mornings can be chilly. Does your place hold heat okay? I've got no complaints. He shut the door to the stove, and Lynn watched him for a moment, glad that she no longer had to hide her interest. He returned her gaze and smiled. Do you ever wonder what it's like somewhere else? What do you mean? Like somewhere without sub-zero winters? Mother would talk about going south sometimes, Lynn said, but I never wanted to. Why not? 'Cause then we'd be like other wanderers, carrying the only water you have and hoping you find more before long. You'd rather have your pond and tough out the winters? Much rather. Eli nodded. When we left the city, I was terrified, and we had a destination in mind. I can't imagine walking without a goal. How long were you out there before you found the stream? Weeks, maybe even a month. I tried to keep track of the days, but pretty soon I was measuring time by how big Neva's belly was getting, not in sunrises. Did you see many people out there? Mostly it was just gunshots, some of them aimed at our feet, although one whizzed right by my ear. No shout, nothing, just a bullet coming for my head. I didn't even know we were close to someone's water. Lynn could see it. Eli slogging through the last of the falling leaves at an incredibly slow pace so that Neva could keep up. Lucy probably trailing behind because of her swollen feet, maybe looking for grasshoppers as she went. And then a gunshot. Lynn recoiled as if she'd pulled the trigger herself. Most people will at least give you a warning shot, like the ones you had. The ones aimed at your feet. But not everybody. No, not everybody. Lynn got out of bed, put on her warmer clothes, and started a pot of coffee. That's tempting, Eli said, watching her, but I should probably go. Neva will be worried if she wakes up and I'm not back. Right, Lynn said, focusing on the pot of water. Do you ever hold her like that? Like with me last night? No, Eli said immediately. It's not like that between us. I'm boy enough to know she's beautiful, and man enough to know she'll always be my brother's wife. Lynn smiled back at his honesty. I had to ask. Eli opened his mouth to answer her, but there was a pounding on the door. Lynn grabbed her handgun and went up the stairs. Seconds later, Lucy came bouncing down. Hey, Uncle Eli. Lynn followed her more slowly with steps on her trail. Hey, Uncle Eli indeed, he said wryly, looking between the two younger people. Would it be naive of me to assume that you left late last night and came back early this morning? Lynn blushed and began making up the cot, then realized she was bringing attention to the fact that there was only one cot to be made. Don't start, she said tightly to Stebbs. As much as I'd love to spend the morning teasing you, I've got a serious question for you both. Lynn stopped making the bed. What is it? How long has it been since either one of you saw smoke to the south? Weeks, easy, Lynn answered quickly, having checked every morning. Eli glanced at her, thinking. I don't remember any recently, but to be honest, I don't always look. I'm with you, Stebbs said to Lynn. It's been a while, and nothing's surviving without heat in this weather. You think they're gone? Gone or dead. Eli leaned back in his chair. I feel like shit for saying so, but that's a relief. It's a relief, period. Lynn said as she tried to place the unfamiliar feeling of warmth that spread through her chest at the sight of the people she cared about gathered safely under her roof. Chapter 16. Lynn couldn't remember a winter that had been so content. The plentiful snowfall meant that there was no need to break the ice on the pond to gather water. When they were thirsty, Lynn and Lucy gathered snow in buckets and warmed it on the stove or ate it in frozen mouthfuls, after pelting each other with it first. With the threat from the south removed, Lynn joined Lucy on the ground and showed her the different tracks in the snow. Deer and raccoon, the occasional flying leaps of a squirrel that left a sporadic, clumsy trail. The padded track of the coyotes that had been making appearances again. Lucy learned fast and wanted to know more. Lynn taught her how to distinguish the different bird calls of the hardier birds that stayed for the winter, and how to make a grunt call with her cupped hands to attract bucks. Lucy was thriving, her thin arms and legs now stocky with muscle from fighting her way through the snowdrifts in search of her next adventure. Lynn followed her, plowing after the little footprints and warning her off the icy pond on the warmer days. They made the occasional trip to Stebb's, though it made Lynn anxious to go. Lucy told her no one wanted a pond that was frozen solid, and they agreed to only be gone a little while. Lynn found her worries melting away once in Stebb's comforting presence, and they usually stayed long past her time limit. Eli visited often, making the artist trek from the stream even on the coldest of days. Lucy would shower him with attention for a while after he showed up, then be distracted by something new, leaving them to talk privately and hold each other's gloved hands. Eli's visits were short by necessity. Neva liked some moments alone, but her fear of the wilderness didn't allow those moments to stretch into hours. There's a fine line between enjoying some alone time and just downright being lonely, Eli said as they trailed in Lucy's wake one snowy afternoon. Do you think she needs Lucy back? Lynn asked, even though she wasn't ready to make the offer. I don't want Neva to hate me, but I want what's best for Lucy. Right now, and I hate to say it, being with Neva is not it, Eli answered. She's not entirely stable. She carries that gun you gave her inside her bra. That hardly makes her unstable, Lynn said, letting go of his hand to pat the sidearm she had tucked into her overalls pocket. It's common sense. Maybe for a girl like you it is, but Neva hadn't even seen a gun until we got here. Now she sleeps with one? Lynn shrugged off his concerns, and they walked quietly hand in hand for a while. Do you think she'd come over here? Maybe she'd leave the stream now that the men from the south are gone. It's possible. I can ask. Steb says that there's a warm spell coming. Maybe then. Maybe. Eli squeezed Lynn's hand and stopped her in her tracks. He held her face in his hands for a moment, tucking stray strands of hair behind her cap. Can we talk about Neva for just a minute? Sorry, can we stop talking about Neva for just a minute? Lynn agreed with a smile and leaned forward for her kiss. Eli turned to her, his voice rolling over the snowdrifts. Wait. A small voice taunted them in the distance. Lynn and Eli kissing in a tree. Kissing. Eli turned to... sorry. Had to deal with the bird. Okay. Eli turned to her, his voice rolling over the snowdrifts. Do you even know what that spells, Brainwave? I think it spells that you're in love. Eli turned back to Lynn, his hand still on her face. She might be onto something. Lucy popped up beside them. Can I have hot chocolate? Racia. Eli challenged Lucy, and they started for the house at a dead run that turned into a rolling ball of clothing when Lucy took him out at the knees. Lynn followed more slowly, noting the muted edges of the drifts. The snow was melting, imperceptibly at first, but it was going. Soon the spring would warm temperatures, mud everywhere, and a high water mark in the pond due to runoff. For the moment, life was good. Though she knew spring was close, the nights were still long, and Lynn's dreams were not as pleasant as her days. Sleep came easily, but it didn't last. After one nightmare, Lynn woke with Mother on her mind. Lucy's breathing filled the room, and she envied the little girl deep in sleep and having innocent dreams. She unwrapped her legs from the sheets, pulled her boots and coat on, and silently slipped up the basement stairs and out the back door. There was no moon tonight. The utter blackness of the outdoors descended upon her and swallowed all her thoughts, leaving her aware only of her surroundings and what she could hide in it. She unshouldered her rifle and sat on the stone step, grateful for the familiar worries of something she could control. Lucy's sleeping form, curled in content, slipped through her mind, and she tightened her grip on the rifle, eyes roaming the black expanse of the night. Her gaze drifted to the south from habit, where a pale glow made the tree line of Stubbs' woods visible. What the hell? Lynn was so taken aback that she spoke aloud, her words trickling away into the night. She thought for a second that she had worried away the entire night, but the sun wouldn't be rising in the south, and the glow she saw there wasn't the natural pink of the morning. It was a sickly yellow, its pale aura reaching only past the stark black of Stubbs' treetops, and shedding light no further. Lynn studied it with a grim face, her mouth tight. She clicked the rifle safety off, all traces of fatigue stolen from her in a breath. The light was unfamiliar and strange, which meant it was dangerous. Stubbs appeared on the horizon a few days later, his limping trail snaking behind him. Lucy had learned quickly how to spot his tracks. The telltale drag of his injured foot and left an easily distinguishable pattern on the snow. For weeks in the dead of winter, he had created crisscross paths, making a game for her to find the right one that ended with him, and a bear hug. She ran toward him the second she spotted him, abandoning Lynn to the task of scraping off ice from the doorstep. The melt giving you much trouble? Stubbs asked when he made it to the house, Lucy tucked safely in the crook of his arm. Not bad. I'm tired of the refreezing in the night, though. Lucy fell walking out the door this morning. I can't have her breaking a leg. No, 'cause then someone would have to carry her around everywhere they went, Stubbs said to the little girl, who leaned her head against his shoulder and giggled. What a chore. He sat her down and Lucy tugged on his hand. Come inside and eat with us, and see what I made. Lynn's teaching me to knit. Is that a fact? I'm trying, Lynn said, swatting the little girl's backside as she ran past her down the stairs. That one's got the patience of a gnat. And Eli's teaching me to play guitar, Lucy added. Again, trying, Lynn said to Stubbs, as she tossed wood onto the stove and opened a jar of vegetables. Once they were settled and eating, Stubbs brought up his reason for visiting. There's another pack of coyotes in the area. I know, Lynn said between bites. We heard them last night. The frantic yelping of the pack had brought Lucy onto Lynn's cot, her small body quivering in fear. Lucy took a bite of her corn and looked from Stubbs to Lynn. I thought you killed them all, she said. Can't get all of them, little one. You'd best play closer to the house for a while, Stubbs said. Lucy made a face, but Lynn knew she would listen. The wild dogs scared the little girl away in a way the other, less obvious dangers didn't. The big one, you know, Stubbs trailed off, watching to see if Lynn caught his meaning. He's still out there. You see him? No, but I've seen his track. Lynn didn't want to speak about what had happened to Mother in front of Lucy. Why don't you run off and see if you can find that toad in the pantry? Lucy's eyes widened. You think he's still there? I thought I saw him when I went in for the vegetables. Take the flashlight. See if you can catch him. Lucy jumped at the chance to use the coveted flashlight and disappeared behind the wooden blankets separating the two rooms. Lynn offered what was left on her plate to Stubbs, having lost her appetite. You think he'd come up to the house again? Not to be crass, but he's found food here before. And Lucy would be an easy kill for a pack like the one I heard the other night. I'll keep her close by, Lynn assured him. I hate keeping her inside, though. There's only so much daylight as it is, and this basement doesn't let much in. That's the next bit I wanted to talk to you about, Stubbs said. The harsh part of winter's over, and Eli's much more capable than he used to be. I know it, Lynn said, and I know what you're driving at. We talked it over the other day, and he thinks maybe Neva will come over here to see Lucy. We thought that maybe they could readjust to each other kinda before she moves over there. Sounds like a good idea. When? We thought next week maybe, once the weather breaks. You said it would be warmer soon? I'm counting on a total melt, then it'll freeze up again, and maybe 1 or 2 good snows before winter's done with us. Lynn ignored the dropping of her heart at the thought of Lucy leaving her. After the melt, then. She glanced toward the blanket dividing the two rooms, where Lucy's voice could be heard calling out for the toad she was looking for. I saw something to the south a few nights ago. What was it? There was a glow up in the sky, kind of like the sun was trying to come up in the wrong place. Stubbs' mouth drew tight and his eyebrows came together. What color was it? Yellow, I guess. It didn't look right, though, like the yellow of a dandelion or something like that. More sickly? Lynn nodded slowly. Yeah, that's a good word for it. And you saw it when? Just the other night when there was no moon. Not since then. You probably wouldn't if there was any kind of moon in the sky. It would drown it out. Drown out what? The glow of electricity from a small town or even a group of houses. On a black night, it wouldn't take much to light up the sky. Lynn was quiet as Stubbs' words drilled down inside her, to a place that was even darker than the moonless night had been. They're still alive, then? The men from the south? Stubbs nodded grimly. If they've got generators to make electricity, then they've got heat, too. No need for fires. Stubbs closed her eyes against the thought. Generators, huh? Assholes. Lynn found herself bestowing small luxuries on Lucy. A new black button nose for Red Dog, the last cup of hot chocolate, a new pair of striped socks that she had knitted for her on the sly. The night before Neva's arrival, Lucy stumbled for Lynn's cot in the dark. Small, cold fingers found her face. Can I sleep with you? Lynn sighed and pretended to be irritated, but allowed Lucy to climb in beside her. Curled together in the dark, Lynn found the courage to broach the topic she'd been avoiding since Stubbs' visit. So tomorrow's going to be a big day, she said. Lucy's voice, drowsy and content, hummed against her neck. What's that? Your mother is coming to see you. Okay. That's all you gotta say? The small shoulders shrugged, and a light snoring soon followed. Lynn wrapped her arms protectively around the small frame. It'll be all right, she said. I promise. Lynn slept in much later than usual, as reluctant to face the day ahead of them as Lucy was. Lucy resisted all attempts to wake her. Lynn had expected resentment, possibly even outright anger toward the mother who'd been absent for so long. But the blanket-covered form in the cot was ignoring Lynn completely, presenting her with her back and pretending not to hear when she told her it was time to get up. All right, little girl, Lynn said as she pulled on her knitted cap. I'm going outside. I might hunt a bit, but I'll stay right inside of the house. Once you get up, keep an eye out for Stubbs. He's coming too, you know. No reaction. And Uncle Eli. No reaction. Fine, but when I come back here, I want you to be up and out of bed, or I will get you up and out of bed. Understood? The curly blonde head on the pillow nodded almost imperceptibly, and Lynn stomped up the stairs and out onto the late morning air. Dead grass showed in large patches around the yard, and Lynn had to walk a ways from the house to find a clean patch of white snow to freshen her mouth with. The sporadic, panicked tracks of a rabbit tore across the yard at one point, nearly obliterated by the blundering leaps of the coyote that had chased it. Lynn was in no hurry to force Lucy out of bed to face Neva, so she took her time tracking the two animals, curious to see if the rabbit had managed to escape. A patch of blood a mile from the house told her it hadn't. Lynn rested under the trees and watched two blue jays bickering. Their harsh sounds bounced off the snow, masking the sound of Stubbs' approach. Hey there, he said, leaning against the tree with her. Not used to seeing you out alone. Lucy's back at the house. Lynn nodded toward the roof in the distance. I thought I'd give her some time to think things over, Stubbs suggested. Yeah, something like that. Looks like maybe you're doing the same. Maybe. Lynn rubbed the stock of her rifle, but the gun didn't bring the comfort it used to. But best to head back, I suppose. Stubbs fell into step beside her, and they walked in companionable silence until they reached the pond. Quite the melt, he commented. Your pond's high. I see you still got ice on the edges, though. Can't skate anymore. Lucy will be disappointed. It'll freeze over again before the winter's over. Without commenting on it, Lynn noticed that Stubbs was struggling against the snow with his lame leg. She leaned against the house under the cover of a large pine, and he joined her, his breath coming a little faster than usual. "When are you expecting Eli and Neva?" "Don't know. He said sometime this afternoon, but I slept in quite a bit, and then went out tracking for a while. I imagine they'll be along soon enough. I told Lucy I'd be inside of the house. If she wanted to find us, she could have. I told her Neva was coming last night, and she didn't take it so well. It's understandable." "Yeah, well, maybe, but I don't want Neva bent out of shape about it. Or Lucy mad at me, for that matter. Want me to go down and try?" "Better hurry," Lynn said, nodding toward the west, where Eli's and Neva's figures could be made out. Stubbs lumbered to his feet and disappeared inside. Neva broke into the side yard ahead of Eli, poked a finger into the side of the half-melted snowman by the wood cord, and smiled. Eli nodded and said something to her, but it was lost in a cry from the basement. "Lynn, get down here." The urgency in Stubbs' voice sent Lynn reeling down the stairs where he was cradling Lucy in his arms, her entire form limp, her closed eyes red-rimmed with fever. "How long has she been like this?" Lynn stared dumbfounded at the unconscious Lucy. "Lynn, I don't know. I thought she was sleeping. I haven't been back down here since I woke up." Two sets of feet pounded down the stairs, and Eli fell forward into the basement, Neva close behind him. What is it?" Neva's hands flew to her mouth when she saw Lucy. Tears streamed from the corners of her eyes. "Give her to me," she said. Stubbs handed her over carefully, and Neva cradled the light head against her own dark one, rocking her slowly back and forth. "What happened, baby? What's wrong?" There was no answer. There was a light touch on Lynn's shoulder. She's not gone, is she?" "No," Stubbs answered Eli. There was a pulse, but it's light. "What happened? When did she get sick?" "I don't know," Lynn said, her voice shaking. "She crawled into bed with me last night, and I thought she was fine, but she didn't want to get up." "Shit, I'm so sorry, Neva. I didn't know." Neva waved away the apology. "Give me a cloth," she said as she laid Lucy back on the cot. "We've got to break this fever." Stubbs looked in amazement at his own hands, still hot to the touch from holding Lucy. "She's burning up." His words caused a panic in Lynn's mind, dredging up memories of corpses without bullet holes strewn across the fields, bodies that the buzzards wouldn't touch. Cholera burned through people so quickly that they died in their tracks, wandering in a haze toward a water source that Mother wouldn't let them near. One man had veered away from the pond and hailed Mother from the yard. Lynn had clutched onto her so tightly, fear of the stranger digging her little fingers deep into Mother's tanned skin. He'd begged for water, pleading that he was not ill like the others and would not contaminate the pond. Mother had refused and sent him off with a warning. Hours later he was back, shit streaking his legs and begging for a bullet instead. This time Mother had granted his request. Lynn dug her fingers into Stubbs' coat, her voice a harsh whisper. "It's not the cholera, is it?" "No, she always does this," Neva said, peeling off a layer of warm sleeping clothes from Lucy. "You can't just get a little fever, can you, baby? You've got to go big." Tears were still sliding down her face, but Neva was moving with purpose. She looked up at her audience. "Move. I need a cold, wet cloth, now, and a thermometer if you have one." Neva's conviction broke Lynn's stillness. She shot up the stairs with Eli on her heels. "There's some washcloths in the bathroom," she called over her shoulder. "Use the clean water downstairs in the tank." "Where are you going?" "Thermometer," she answered, without bothering to explain why she was running up the staircase. Mother had squirreled away all of Lynn's baby clothes, blankets, bottles, and, she hoped, baby thermometer as well. She burst into the attic, throwing open lids to steamer trunks and tossing clothes in the air in a frantic search. The objecting screech of a baby toy told her It's like, what? Okay. The objecting screech of a baby toy told her she'd found the right trunk, and Lynn dug to the bottom, overwhelmed with relief at the sight of the plastic thermometer. "Please work," she said to it, and the digital screen lit up at her touch. Her heart was beating so hard she almost didn't hear the footsteps on the roof. Lynn instinctively dropped down, hand clutched protectively around the thermometer. For a moment there was nothing, only the sound of her own blood pumping through her veins. Then she heard it again. Someone was on her roof.